For most of the world, the word Yakuza conjures up images of men in impeccable suits, bodies covered in colorful tattoos and amputated fingers. It is an organization shrouded in an aura of mystery and danger. But its true story does not begin in the skyscrapers of Tokyo or the ports of Yokohama. It begins in the mud, in poverty, and in rejection. The very name, Yakuza, is a confession of its origin. It comes from a traditional card game called Oichokabu. In this game, the worst possible hand is the combination of the numbers 8, 9, and 3. In Japanese, these numbers are pronounced ya, ku, and sa. To be a Yakuza literally means to be an 893, a losing hand, an outcast of society, like subscribe and share. Let us begin. To understand how these losers became the most structured mafia on the planet, we must travel back to the 17th century, to the beginning of the Edo period. In this unified but rigid Japan, thousands of samurai were left masterless after the end of the civil wars. These warriors, known as ronin, wandered the country aimlessly. Some became bandits who raided villages, while others chose to protect citizens in exchange for food or money. However, the true ancestors of the modern Yakuza emerged from two very specific social groups, the Tekiya and the Bakuto. The Tekiya were street vendors who frequented markets and temple fairs. They were people who had no place in the Japanese caste system. To survive, they formed closed guilds where they protected each other from scams and the police. The Tokugawa government, unable to control the chaos of the markets, decided to grant them official legitimacy. They were allowed to carry a short sword and have a surname, privileges previously reserved for samurai. In return, the Tekiya were required to maintain order in their markets. Thus was born the idea of a criminal organization functioning as a parallel authority, a necessary evil to prevent society from descending into anarchy. On the other hand, there were the Bakuto, the gamblers. In a Japan where gambling was illegal, these men operated in the shadows of inns and along the roads. The Bakuto were the ones who developed most of the traditions we now associate with the Yakuza, such as extensive tattoos and the YUBITSUME ritual. While the Tekiya were seen as rough but useful traders, the Bakuto were street warriors, men who lived by a strict code of honor based on loyalty and courage. Over time, these two groups merged, creating a unique structure that blended business acumen with military discipline. The glue that held this organization together for centuries was the Oyabun-Kobun system. This is key to understanding why the Yakuza is so difficult to eradicate. Oyabun means father and Kobun means son. When a new recruit enters the organization, a ritual ceremony is held with sake where he swears eternal loyalty to his boss. From that moment on, his blood ties to his actual family are severed. His Oyabun is his new father, and his associates are his brothers. This artificial family structure fosters a loyalty that goes far beyond money. It is a matter of identity and survival. A Kobun must be willing to go to jail or even die to protect his Oyabun, no questions asked. This link was crucial during the Meiji Restoration at the end of the 19th century. As Japan frantically modernized to resemble the West, the Yakuza positioned themselves as guardians of traditional Japanese values. Many joined ultra-nationalist secret societies, collaborating with the government to carry out tasks that the army or police could not officially perform, such as espionage abroad or the suppression of workers' strikes. It was during this period that the Yakuza ceased to be a small-town gambling gang and became a politically influential force with national reach. However, despite their growing power, the Yakuza never forgot their origins as the children of the marginalized. In their communities, they often presented themselves as protectors of the poor. If a natural disaster struck or an injustice was committed by a corrupt official, the Yakuza would intervene before the state. This role as Knights of the Night granted them a level of social acceptance unmatched by other organized crime groups worldwide. In Japan, Yakuza headquarters are not hidden. They often have metal plaques on the door bearing the clan's name and are legally registered with the police. But make no mistake, behind the code of honor and community protection, violence was always the ultimate tool. Conflicts between clans for territorial control in cities like Osaka and Tokyo were brutal. It was in this environment of constant danger that the sacrificial rituals that seem terrifying to us today were perfected. The men who joined the Yakuza knew they were entering a path of no return, where mistakes were paid for with flesh and betrayal with life. The stage was set for the transition to the 20th century, where the Yakuza would face world wars and foreign occupations, evolving into an organized crime giant that would threaten the very stability of the land of the rising sun. Joining the Yakuza is not simply becoming a criminal gang. It is subjecting body and soul to an irreversible transformation. Two elements visually and physically define a member of the organization: the irezumi, or traditional tattoo, and the YUBITSUME, the act of cutting off a finger for honor. These are not mere decorations or random punishments, but the marks of an identity that forever separates the man from civil society. They are tests of endurance, demonstrating that the individual is capable of withstanding any torture rather than betray his criminal family. Irezumi is perhaps the most iconic characteristic of the Yakuza. Unlike Western tattoos done with electric machines, traditional Japanese tattooing is done using the tebori technique, which means hand carving. A master tattoo artist uses a bamboo or metal rod with needles at the end to manually insert the ink into the skin. It is an extremely slow, expensive, and above all painful process. A full set of tattoos can take hundreds of hours and several years to complete, costing tens of thousands of dollars. The tattoo design typically covers the back, buttocks, thighs, and arms, but there is one fundamental rule. The tattoo must not be visible when the man is wearing a suit or kimono. A clean line of untattooed skin is usually left down the center of the chest, and the forearms are left bare. This allows the Yakuza to blend into public life, revealing his true identity only in private or to his enemies. The motifs are often mythological: dragons representing wisdom and power, koi fish symbolizing perseverance, or historical samurai embodying courage. Enduring the pain of tebori, the tattooing process, is the ultimate rite of passage. If a man cannot withstand the needles, it is considered that he will not be able to withstand the pressures of a life of crime. But if a tattoo is a mark of pride, the YUBITSUME is a mark of shame and redemption. This ritual consists of the amputation of the first phalanx of the left little finger. Its origin dates back to the ancient Bakuto gamblers. In Japanese swordsmanship, the last three fingers of the left hand are the ones that grip the katana most firmly. By losing the tip of the little finger, the man loses strength in his grip, making him more dependent on his lord for protection. As his skill with the sword is diminished, it is an act of total submission. The YUBITSUME is generally performed to apologize for a serious mistake or to save the life of a subordinate. The ritual is crude. The offender places their hand on a clean cloth and, with an extremely sharp knife or a tanto, he cuts off the tip of their finger. They then wrap the severed finger in silk and present it to their oyabun as a peace offering. If the mistake is repeated, the next phalanx is cut off, or they begin with a finger of the other hand. In modern Japan, seeing a man with missing fingers is an immediate red flag that closes all doors to legal society. This blood code creates an insurmountable psychological barrier. A tattooed Yakuza with amputated fingers knows he no longer belongs to the world of the katagi, ordinary people. He cannot go to public baths, he cannot enter many gyms, and these days he is even banned from certain hotels. This self-imposed isolation reinforces loyalty to the clan. If the outside world rejects you, your only home is the organization. The clan is not just your job, it is your only chance at survival. Honor, or giri, is the other side of the coin. Giri is a moral obligation that must be fulfilled at all costs. If an oyabun has done you a favor or saved you from the streets, you owe a debt that can last a lifetime. This ethic is what the Yakuza call ninkyo, the way of the humanitarian gentleman. Although they are criminals to the rest of the world, they see themselves as heirs to Bushido, protectors of a traditional order that modern Japan has forgotten. However, this romanticized view constantly clashes with the brutality of their activities. Control of prostitution, drug trafficking, illegal gambling, and extortion are the financial foundation that allows these rituals to continue. As the 20th century progressed, the Yakuza began to realize that honor and tattoos were not enough to survive in a rapidly changing world. The arrival of World War II and the subsequent United States occupation forced the organization to evolve, moving from street markets to the highest echelons of national power. Japan's transition to modernity in the early 20th century did not weaken the Yakuza. On the contrary, it provided them with a new playing field: nationalist politics and imperial expansionism. During the 1920s and 1930s, the line separating organized crime from fanatical patriotism became almost invisible. Many Yakuza leaders who had always considered themselves guardians of Japanese identity aligned themselves with far-right factions. These groups, known as Uyoku Dantai, used clan thugs to intimidate liberal politicians, break workers' strikes, and silence any voices that opposed the growing militarism. The most emblematic figure of this era was Mitsuru Toyama, founder of the Black Ocean Society. Although not a Yakuza in the traditional sense of a street gambler, he operated exactly like one, using a network of spies and assassins to influence Japan's foreign policy. Under his wing, Yakuza clans expanded across the Asian mainland, following in the footsteps of the Imperial Army in Manchuria and China. There, the Yakuza managed the occupation's dirty business, such as controlling opium dens and managing shadowy logistics, generating astronomical profits that funded both the clans and military intelligence operations. However, the real turning point came with the end of World War II. In 1945, Japan was a physically devastated country, occupied by American troops and with a subsistence economy. The government and police were overwhelmed or dismantled by the occupation authorities led by General Douglas MacArthur. In this absolute power vacuum, the Yakuza not only survived but flourished. The Gurentai emerged, gangs of criminals far more violent and less respectful of the traditional code than the old Bakuto, dedicated exclusively to the black market. In a Japan where food and medicine were scarce, the Yakuza controlled supplies. Their open-air markets, known as Aozora Ichiba, were the only place ordinary citizens could obtain rice or clothing. But this control was not without conflict. The occupation brought thousands of workers from former colonies such as Koreans and Chinese, who also tried to control the black market. This sparked brutal urban warfare. The Japanese police, initially prohibited by the Americans from carrying firearms, were powerless to stop the pitched battles in cities like Kobe and Tokyo. It was during this period of chaos that something extraordinary happened. The police and the American occupation authorities began using traditional Yakuza clans to combat foreign gangs and communist groups, gaining strength within the labor unions. The Yakuza went from being the public enemy to a tactical ally in the fight, to maintain social order and halt the spread of communism in Japan. This relationship of convenience allowed the organization to become institutionalized in a way that few mafias have achieved. In exchange for keeping the streets peaceful and suppressing leftist protests, they were allowed to operate their gambling and prostitution businesses with relative impunity. This post-war period also saw the rise of a new generation of leaders who understood that the Yakuza had to operate like a modern business if it wanted to survive. Controlling a single street or village market was no longer enough. Clans began to federate, creating national structures with thousands of members. The violence of the Gurentai merged with the discipline of the Bakuto, creating a hybrid organization capable of extreme cruelty but also adept at wearing suits and ties to negotiate in the offices of the construction companies building the new Japan. By 1950, the Yakuza was no longer a marginalized group on the periphery. They were at the heart of the economic reconstruction. They controlled the ports, the construction workforce, and the entertainment industry. They had gone from tattoos hidden beneath kimonos to managing multi-million-dollar budgets in the shadows. However, this massive growth would bring with it unbearable internal tensions. The struggle to see who would become the shogun of Japanese organized crime was about to erupt. And the main stage would be the city of Kobe, where a single man would transform a small local clan into the most powerful criminal empire in the world. Then, like, subscribe and share. If the Yakuza has a name that inspires both respect and terror throughout Japan, it is the Yamaguchi-gumi. And if there is one man responsible for transforming a small gang of dock workers into the largest crime syndicate on the planet, it is Kazuo Taoka, known as the Bear for his habit of attacking his enemy's eyes during fights. Taoka assumed command of the Yamaguchi-gumi in 1946, becoming the organization's third Oyabun. Under his leadership, the Yakuza experienced its true golden age, transforming into a criminal enterprise of terrifying efficiency. Taoka was a visionary. He understood before anyone else that the future of the Yakuza lay not in petty street scams, but in controlling legitimate industries. Under the motto, "Get a real job," he forced his subordinates to infiltrate the construction, shipping, and most importantly, entertainment sectors. Taoka founded talent agencies and organized concert tours, controlling the lives of Japan's biggest stars. Suddenly, the Yakuza not only controlled illegal gambling but also decided who would succeed on television and in film. However, this expansion was not peaceful. The 1960s and 1970s were the most violent decades in modern Japanese history. The Yamaguchi-gumi embarked on a campaign of national conquest, absorbing smaller clans or annihilating them if they resisted. This sparked the infamous Hiroshima bombings and conflicts in Osaka, where the streets became battlefields. Daylight shootings, car bombs, and katana assassinations in public places became commonplace. The police, though attempting to intervene, were overwhelmed by the quasi-military discipline of the Taoka soldiers. This era was immortalized by filmmaker Kinji Fukasaku in his Battles Without Honor or Humanity film series, which depicted the harsh reality of the Yakuza. Men betraying each other for money, a far cry from the romanticized image of the modern samurai. But while blood flowed, the organization grew richer. Kazuo Taoka achieved something that seemed impossible. He created a pyramid structure where thousands of kobun from different clans owed him absolute loyalty. At its peak, the Yamaguchi-gumi boasted over 10,000 active members and controlled a large portion of the country's underground economy. Taoka's relationship with political power was legendary. He was said to have maintained close ties with figures in the Liberal Democratic Party, the party that has governed Japan almost uninterruptedly since the post-war period. The Yakuza functioned as the invisible muscle of the nationalist right. They helped finance campaigns and in return received lucrative public works contracts. The government viewed Taoka's Yakuza as a stabilizing force. As long as they controlled crime, there would be no disorganized gangs or common criminals bothering the citizens. But Taoka's absolute power also made him a target. In 1978, during an event at a Kyoto nightclub, a member of a rival clan managed to breach security and shot him in the neck. Taoka miraculously survived, but the attack triggered an internal purge and a war of revenge that lasted for years. Taoka's death in 1981, from natural causes, marked the end of an era. Without his iron fist, the Yamaguchi-gumi fractured, leading to the Yamaichi War, an internal conflict that resulted in hundreds of deaths and left permanent scars on Japanese society. Despite the violence, the Yakuza of this era maintained a peculiar public image. During the Great Kobe earthquake, for example, members of the Yamaguchi-gumi were among the first to arrive in the devastated areas. Even before the government, the Yakuza distributed water, food, and blankets using their own fleets of trucks and helicopters. Such actions reinforced their image as Ninkyo gentlemen, men who, although living outside the law, had a sacred commitment to their community. However, the world was changing. Japan was about to enter the 1980s, an era of rampant wealth and financial speculation known as the bubble. The Yakuza, already controlling the ports and the entertainment industry, saw a golden opportunity in the real estate market and banking. They no longer needed guns to steal, now they had pens and legal contracts. The organization was about to shed its image of tattooed men in back alleys and become white-collar executives pulling the strings of the global economy. The 1980s transformed the Yakuza from a gang of street warriors into an elite group of financial investors. Japan was experiencing the economic miracle, a period when land values in Tokyo soared to such an extent that the Imperial Palace was theoretically worth more than the entire state of California. In this frenzy of easy money, the Yakuza found its goldmine in the real estate sector through a figure known as the jiageya, or land extractor. When a large construction company wanted to build a skyscraper but a small homeowner refused to sell, they called in the Yakuza. The clans used tactics of psychological harassment, constant noise, and threats to force the neighbors to leave. Once the land was vacant, the construction companies paid astronomical commissions to the clans. It is estimated that at the height of the bubble, the Yakuza was linked to more than 50% of the dubious bank loans in Japan. The Oyabun no longer wore traditional kimonos but rather suits by Italian designers and drove European luxury cars. This infiltration of the legitimate economy was so profound that the Yakuza became a key component of the financial system. Banks used clanshell companies to conceal debts or to pressure other creditors. Japanese organized crime had achieved what no other mafia had: acceptance as a necessary business partner by the corporate and political elite. In clan offices legally located across the street from police stations, bank mergers and national infrastructure projects were now discussed instead of smuggling routes. However, overconfidence was their downfall. In 1991, the economic bubble burst, plunging Japan into a crisis that would last for decades. With the collapse of land prices and the banking system, the secrets of the Yakuza began to surface. The Japanese public, fed up with the corruption and violence that still occasionally erupted, began to pressure the government. For the first time in history, civil society said enough. The image of the Yakuza as a necessary evil or a traditional protector crumbled under the weight of corporate greed. In 1992, the Japanese government passed the Law on Measures Against Organized Crime Groups, known as the Botaikyo Law. This law changed the game forever. It was no longer just individual crime that was punished, but also membership in a designated criminal group. The police were given the power to enter clan offices and prohibit any non-transparent business activity. But the most devastating effect was the social pressure. Companies that did business with the Yakuza began to be singled out and penalized. The Yakuza attempted to fight these laws legally, claiming they violated their constitutional right to freedom of association. Some leaders even held press conferences denouncing the government for destroying traditional Japanese culture. But popular support had evaporated. Citizens began organizing neighborhood patrols and filing class-action lawsuits against clan headquarters to expel them from their communities. The wall of silence that had protected the organization for centuries was cracking. By the late 1990s, the Yakuza was in retreat. Many low-ranking members, seeing that the easy money of the boom had dried up and that police pressure was suffocating, began to leave the organization. The average age of members began to rise dramatically. Young people no longer saw a life of crime as glamorous or heroic. The white-collar lifestyle became dangerous, and the clans had to return to the shadows, but this time in a far less tolerant Japan. The era of impunity was over. Spurred on by the post-bubble financial disaster, the Japanese government set itself a clear goal: to economically strangle the Yakuza until nothing remained. They were about to enter the 21st century, an era where technology and iron-fisted legislation would transform the once powerful Oyabun into social outcasts, incapable of even performing the most basic tasks of modern life. The 21st century brought not new opportunities for the Yakuza, but a social death sentence that has proven more effective than any bullet. What gang wars could not achieve in decades, bureaucracy and a radical shift in the Japanese public's mindset accomplished. Starting in 2011, all of Japan's prefectures implemented Yakuza exclusion ordinances, a series of laws that not only prosecute crime but also make simply interacting with a member of the clan a crime or a serious offense. The goal is the civil death of the offender. Today, a man identified as a Yakuza is an absolute outcast. He cannot open a bank account, obtain a credit card, and most shockingly, sign a contract for something as basic as a mobile phone or car insurance. If a Yakuza attempts to conceal his identity to obtain a service, he is charged with fraud, a crime that carries mandatory prison sentences. This economic strangulation has shattered the glamorous lifestyle of the 1980s. The clans can no longer afford the lavish banquets or maintain the luxury cars that once symbolized their status. This pressure has led to a demographic collapse within the organization. The Yakuza is now a society of elderly members. The average age of its members is over 50, and an alarming percentage are over 70. Young Japanese people raised in a digital age and with a different social conscience no longer see honor in cutting off a finger or living as a fugitive. They prefer to join disorganized crime groups known as hangura, gangs that do not follow the Bushido code, have no fixed offices, and are much harder for the police to track, as they operate primarily through the internet and telephone scams. The lack of generational succession has led to almost pathetic situations. Veteran Yakuza members have been arrested for stealing melons from farms or fishing illegally to feed themselves. The clan's social welfare system, the Oyabun Koban that guaranteed the father would care for his son, has broken down because there is no more money to divide. This led to the biggest split in recent history in 2015. The legendary Yamaguchi Gumi divided, giving rise to the Kobe Yamaguchi Gumi. This internal civil war has not been a fight for honor, but a desperate struggle for the few remaining resources in a vanishing criminal market. Even the tattoo ritual and the YUBITSUME, a form of self-immolation, have become an unbearable burden. Former members attempting rehabilitation and reintegration into society find their physical scars a life sentence. Foundations and doctors have emerged offering free laser tattoo removal and silicone prostheses for amputated fingers, enabling ex-Yakuza to find humble jobs without facing discrimination. The stigma is so strong that even the children and relatives of members suffer harassment and exclusion from school or work, leading many Kobun, former members, to abandon their bosses to secure their children's future. Despite this decline, the Yakuza refuses to disappear completely. Some clans have reinvented themselves as political pressure groups or moved their operations to Southeast Asia, where the laws are less stringent. However, their influence in the heart of Japan is a shadow of its former self. The glass castles they built during the boom have crumbled, and the divine wind of modernity seems to have finally swept away the last of the outcasts. The story of the Yakuza is the tale of how an organization born from social rejection rose to the heights of national power and was ultimately devoured by the very society that once accepted it as a necessary evil. The legacy of the Yakuza will remain in popular culture, in gangster films and in video games, but on the streets of Shinjuku and in the ports of Kobe, the silence grows ever deeper. The tattooed dragons are aging in silence, a reminder of an era of honor and violence that no longer has a place in the Japan of the future. It is the end of a criminal epic that lasted 400 years, proving that in the end, no sword or blood code can withstand the relentless march of time and the law. Next, like, subscribe, and share. Until the next one.